welcome. This is Fashion Revolution, and we meet on Zoom on Sundays to collaborate, challenge ourselves, and cultivate our businesses. We're a bunch of independent designers that see sustainable fashion as a solution to the fast fashion problem. And we do a quarterly challenge, and the first challenge that we did for 2022 this year is to come up with a way to upcycle a common thrift store donation item, like a denim or knits or a button-up shirt, and to do that by dyeing it, painting it, or coloring it in some way. And that is why we have our guest today, James Allen, with us. James Allen does amazing batik. He's a research scientist. He researches MS, and he got into the fiber arts as just an outlet for that. He's a very creative person. He's also in a band. So we're going to go as long as we can today without actually making him late for band practice. Okay. And James, if you just want to say a few words to introduce yourself, please add on to what I just said.
I'm James Allen, and I'm more than happy to contribute what I can to this effort, a noble cause. All of the everything I'll be talking about is directly applicable to fibers like cotton and rayon, which are the kind of materials that I prefer.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing that. And I actually want to invite you to share something you were telling me when we were preparing to record about how you, what your business model is.
Yes. So basically, I do have a full-time day job, and I'm staying there until the night job pays. I get a lot more out of the arts rather than just looking for a way to sustain my life. And so, and yet I find that I have a lot of people that would like to have what I create. So I've created a model where I try to encourage people to donate to their favorite causes that, and I like to be able to agree with those. And then I reward those donations with whatever art they would like. And that's my model, if you will.
Right. So if I'm going to donate to, say, the NRA, you would decide whether or not you wanted to give me something in exchange for that, right?
And it's not a problem I've had yet. So
good. That's so good. Somehow we just attract to us people that really do share our values. So
exactly. I actually have found that most people give more than I would ever really actually sell the work for, and it just makes me feel
that's
good.
wonderful. Well, maybe some of our designers are going to adopt that business model if people are being generous. Wow.
Well, I'm not against someone making a living at it. And indeed, I mean, I turned 64, so and so I'm not singing the Beatles song anymore. I'm there, and and I too think about maybe segueing into having it as more of a money-making venture. But right now, I still have my day job.
Yeah. Well, I like your business model. Donate to a cause, and I'll give you this in exchange. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the batik process, and what you've learned, how you've learned it, and I have a whole set of links that you gave me. I have a set of your links.
So what we're talking about is I made a list of all of the reagents and things that I use with links associated with them. And then I also wanted to say at the outset that, I view, it's a lot to go through, and I really don't mind anyone emailing me, or I'm on Facebook, friend me if you like. And this could be a continuing interaction because really there's no substitute for just getting your hands wet and start doing it. And then, more questions come up, and I really won't be able to go through everything. Dharma Trading Company, it's on the internet. And all these links go there. They have everything that I'm talking about. It's a one place, one-stop shopping. And I really do highly recommend getting their catalog, because they also have a lot of nice instructions and descriptions of things in it. So it's a great resource. Yeah, there we go. What I wanted to start with at the beginning, though, was I don't know what people's background is in just fiber reactive dyes, and I don't know if you want me to go through a little bit of that or not. Or
yeah, I've never heard the term fiber reactive dyes before.
Waxing is a resist. In other words,
Okay.
It prevents the penetration of dye into the cloth. And the other side of that is the dye. You need to use the dye. And I just wanted to mention that Procyon dyes are are for cotton and for rayon. They're not so great on silk, and they don't work on artificial fabrics. And you can get all of these from Dharma Trading, and they basically they come as being inactive, and they need to be activated, and they're active at an alkaline pH. And so for that, you add soda ash.
One of my overall questions is about how much cash do you think somebody needs to drop down to get into just doing their first batik in terms of like buying all the materials? And my second related question is, do they have a starter kit where you can kind of get everything all at once? They do. They have a starter kit. It's not very expensive, and I would get the smallest amounts that they sell. So, you know, 1 pound for this soda ash is $1.69. So this, but they have a starter kit for batiking that has pretty much all of these things. But I wanted to just give a little bit of the background in the chemistry, just because if you leave out, like, for example, the soda ash, it's not going to work. And they describe it in the catalog. The other chemical that's useful in dyeing fabrics is a chemical called urea. And urea is a denaturant, and basically that opens up the fibers to be a little more accessible to the dyes. It's a denaturant, and it loosens up the fibers of the fabric so that it can allow the penetration of the dye more efficiently. So that's something else that you'll see that they'll mention in Dharma.
So the soda ash, because I was kind of thinking that was like a mordant. So is that something that you're mixing with the dye in order to, because I see it says fixer, so.
Great question. But people think about soaking the fabric in the soda ash to activate the fabric, and then you put the dye, inactive dye, on top of it, and activates, and then it gets activated as soon as it hits the cloth. But you can also mix the activator in with the dye, and you can like squirt it on or do whatever you want. And that works as well. But the reason why people don't always do it that way is the dye only stays active when it's mixed with the soda ash for about an hour. So that's why people do keep them separate until when they're about ready to use it. So in a lot of tie-dye methods, I prefer to actually mix the activator in with the dye and then squirt it on a fabric or whatever. But you can't keep it for very long. It goes inactive. Whereas if you just make up the dye without the soda ash, it's good for a month.
Can you kind of take us through chronologically what you do when you batik something, just to kind of give us an overview?
Exactly. So I guess I just wanted to get some of these recipes out there for the dyes before I got into that.
Okay.
Just so that people would understand when I get to that point of when I'm starting to do it, and then I don't have to stop my.
Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah.
There's one more thing I'd like to add, and that is batik's all about keeping having dye being resisted from actually doing its dyeing in particular areas. And there's a couple different ways to do that. One is with wax, and so we put wax on there, and then and the dye won't go through the wax, so you can paint on the inside of it, and that's how I get can draw images. There's another way, which is a non-wax resist, water-based resist number 5. Uh-huh. So this is something you can paint on, or you can squirt on with a little applicator that's got a hole in the top that's variable. And this will keep dyes from penetrating as well, but there's no cracks that come from this. So one thing that people like about batiks is you get wherever you see a crack in the wax, you can get a really nice dyed cracks effect. Whereas this stuff, it just goes on and it just prevents the penetration of the dye. The other thing that this stuff, though, it needs to be done is you need to do both sides of the cloth. Whereas if you apply your wax well with your Tjanting tool, you only need to do one side. But I couldn't do anything without having the non-wax resist too. So a lot of batik artists don't recognize that this is a very powerful tool to have, because this allows you to get very fine structure detail in your batiking. So this is something that I really recommend that you look into. So then there's one other way that we can impact the flow or migration of dye, and that is to make it thicker. So if you just dissolve dye in water, it's gonna, you put that on cotton, it's gonna run. But you can actually put like thickener, like when you're making gravy. There's a molecule made from seaweed called alginate. And let me just, it's number 12. And that's when you dissolve that into the dye, you'll notice it takes a little while to dissolve, but then it gets thicker and thicker, just like gravy. And then that's what I use when I'm painting, and that helps keep the dye from running, from migrating too far. So that works with the wax and the non-wax resist, and then this thickener all together allows you to really do fine structure painting, if you will, on fabric. And I'll give you examples of all of that in a minute, but these are the tools that I use to do what I'm going to show you.
So this thickener, I was like noticing that it had just cotton and then like silk. So are we just talking about like cellulose versus protein fibers? So or is it very specific to those two?
Yeah, so there's two types of it. It's good you saw that. And if you're doing cotton, buy the one that they say is for cotton. And if you're doing silk batiking, by the one that you would use that they recommend using for silk.
Okay. So I guess I'm thinking, because I work with like hemp a lot, would the cotton
hemp is like cotton.
Okay.
Hemp and cotton are hemp, rayon, and cotton are the are everything I'm talking about is directly applicable to those three fabrics.
Perfect.
And silk, the dyes work a little bit on silk that I'm talking about, but there's actually real silk dyes that I would recommend if you're going to do that. I don't work with silk. It's a little beyond mine. But some of the basic things, gloves, a mask. You can get the N95 masks even from Dharma. The dye fibers, you really shouldn't breathe them in. So I wear a mask. When you're painting, obviously, I use paintbrushes. Can never have too many measuring cups and measuring spoons. And then when I'm painting, I like to use old yogurt containers to make the individual colors. Or if I want a lot of them, I use an ice cube tray and then just make different colors. Or sometimes I do gradations of colors and mix colors together. All of this really, and it really, batiking can be just like painting on a canvas, if you think about it. It's the same to me. Okay, the most important thing, have a lot of towels. And then, really when you're getting into the dyeing again, you can dip dye, or if you're a tie dyer, you can use, squirt bottles. And this is, when I tie dye, I make up active dye in the bottles and then just squirt it right on, instead of soaking the shirt, if you will, in the soda ash. Soda ash, again, it's caustic, and I don't like to get it all over me, so I prefer it that way. But you have to watch out because the dye will go off. If you're doing tie dye, again, I recommend cotton string to use when you're tying it up, and the Dharma catalog has some suggested tying, and I'm not going to go over the tying; it's a bit much for here. So there's two kinds of wax. There's beeswax and there's paraffin wax. Beeswax is the softer, and it doesn't really give you any of the traditional batiking cracks that people like. Paraffin wax is very brittle, and if you only use straight paraffin, it cracks too much. And so there's really blends, but nicely is batik wax that Dharma makes up, and it's a blend of the paraffin and the beeswax, which I find works great. So why mix it together? You'll see number one was the Tjanting tool and the temperature regulator that they sell. We brought it up a minute ago, but it's basically, that's my rig right there. One thing is that, so this is the working part, and you put wax in here, and there's a little pin that goes down in there that impedes the flow of the wax out of the bottom. There's still some hard wax on there. And so basically this gives you the ability to control the wax as it's coming out, because you want to keep it, you want to be under control all the time, because kind of wax is a little, if you wax it, it's not going to die underneath it. So you really want to stay in control of that. Some people don't use the electric. There are actually non-electric Tjanting too, where you just have a pot of molten wax and you dip it in and then move it over. And I just don't have the patience to do that. So I really do recommend getting the electric Tjanting tool with the regulator that I've posted in the set of things. Then basically I have a little bottle with a little hoop, and when I'm not using it, it just sits in there, and then I go ahead and do get to the next project. Wax, batik wax is the fumes, I can't stand them. They give me a headache right away. I would work in a well-ventilated room with fans. I always have fans blowing out the window and then a fan behind me pushing the air around past me, because it's not good for you to breathe the wax, even from just having the, even the fumes just from this little thing is not good. And you don't want to, another thing is you don't want to be overheating it, because you'll just generate more fumes. And so I find that once you get things molten in there and it's working, I adjust the temperature down a little bit, so you just reduce those fumes. But I'm very sensitive to it after 20 years. I just, and in the summer I work outside all the time, but unfortunately, it's just too rainy in Seattle to work there in the winter. So definitely well-ventilated room. They have wax molten pots that just directly keep it molten, but I use a coffee pot with water and then put the wax in another bottle inside, and this will melt it, and then I pour it out of this. And this again keeps the fumes lower than having a batik wax pot that they do sell, but it doesn't have, it directly heats the wax.
I just wondered, how do you pour it when it's attached to, do you remove it to pour it, or?
Yeah, so basically, I have a rubber band on here right now, but I basically pull this out and then just pour it in that reservoir.
Okay, and it's not too hot to handle with your hands, and it doesn't.
No, not the top. The top doesn't get too hot. It doesn't get too hot to this. And then I have a little, when you're moving this thing around, it's easy to drip, and so I just have a little something that carry it, because if you're going across your project where you don't want wax and you don't have something to protect it, you will get drips. And so have something to, all of this stuff you'll see, oh, that makes sense now.
Can the wax be reused, or like once it's out of that thing, is it done?
So you can you can reuse the wax. I reuse the wax that's any kind of waste wax, because sometimes but once it's been dyed and stuff or put on a fabric and then you get rid of it, you probably won't be reusing it. You'd have to heat it all up, and I can maybe skim it off, and then you just have to examine the impact of all that extra energy going into trying to reuse it versus just getting new. And so, yeah, I don't reuse it. So I make a lot of projects for local bands, because I love to encourage young people's music. And so there's one that I've made for the Brian Daisley Band. And this is a batik I made for them. And I loved it. During the show, I was wearing the shirt, and the Brian Daisley stopped the show and pointed me out in the audience and told everyone how excited he was to see that. And
I'm like, that's some very intricate work. So that's,
and then I always put a little something on the back, and then they really liked Northwest Hummingbirds, and so that I kind of tune it to what they enjoy. And now this is a dip dye. So basically, draw the image, wax, paint, wax, paint, wax, paint, and then do the same to the back. And then when it's all done, I throw the whole thing in to a dip dye. And you have to pray that the wax keeps its integrity. And that's something I bring up now, because each time you wash out in this wax, paint that I'm going to show you, the previous wax degrades a bit. And so you really have to stay on top of it to understand what you're doing to the prior wax. And this gets at the recycling, because a lot of the wax is gonna, it's just gonna break and then go down the drain in the washes or fall off. And so I've lost many projects where I worked for weeks on learning that. So just be aware that as you do serial waxings and paintings, that the earlier wax is degrading during that whole process. Sometimes things get so, I put so much effort into something, I'll actually de-wax the whole thing and then wax it all again just to protect it for the overdye.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you just put another layer of wax on it, or?
Yeah, but it's a lot of work. You know, and I always do big projects. So, so which leads into my next. So, well, he wanted something to put behind him on the stage. And so I've made his name, and then I don't know if I put Seattle's skyline with Mount Rainier. I don't know if you can see that. And what I do is take the white image and I draw with a pen, and I don't know if you can appreciate, there's a blue ink that has the outline of all that I'm going to wax. And that pen is number 7 marking pens. That blue ink is designed to wash out, so it goes away. Then I use that to guide me to where I put the wax on. And so this thing has been drawn with the blue, with the pen, the Batik marking pen. And then I came in and I waxed all the outside of it, and now it's ready to paint the inside. Then when I'm done with that, I'm going to wax the inside, and then finish the rest of it. And then I'll show you examples of that as well. Question?
Okay, if I'm understanding, you basically you're going to paint the inside of the letters, and then the wax holds that color in place for the next phase. Is that what you're saying?
This wax will only keep the paint inside from going out. Then I'm going to have to wax over what I've painted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just keep going.
I'm going to show you examples of that. So when I get done with it, so I'm going to paint the inside. This outside will still be white. Then I'm going to go and wax the inside. Then I'm going to put stars around all the outside with wax, and then I'm going to paint the whole outside as well, and then I'll be able to wash it out. But I want to get, and I've got examples for the next steps, but this first step is very important. And one is that the integrity of this waxing has to be immaculate, because if it leaks, if the dye when I paint it in here leaks out here, it won't look like a Y anymore, right? So when you're putting the wax on, and I'm turning it around, check the back. So I don't wax the back, but if it's applied well, you're not gonna, then you'll see it's also got that kind of, it's almost translucent a little bit. But sometimes but it's meant to crack, and sometimes, and I may with this, I sometimes come in with that non-wax resist, and I outline all of everything with that as well, to make sure that wax doesn't leak out from when I paint the inside. Does that make sense?
Are you doing that just on the back, or you do it like on the front side with the wax?
I do on both sides.
Okay.
So the non-wax resist, only you have to do both sides every time. The wax, if you do it well, it can actually, and what I mean by well is, you avoid cracking it. Anytime you scrunch it up, you're going to be introducing cracks to wax. And I'm a little concerned because I can see there's a few places where there are cracks, and it'll do what wax does. It lets dye go through there.
Can you just touch it up with a little more wax before you paint in there? So
you see the width of those lines. I know it's hard. You can see my finger and then the width of it. To touch that up, it'll give it it'll erode the continuity. So you can go over the wax with just in the areas where you can see that there's you can selectively place it in some places. But it's just something. So
if you're selectively touching up with the non-wax resist on top of the wax, do you still have to do it on both sides?
Yeah. So here's a series of, I have a shirt that I finished, and then here's a series of shirts of the same thing that's in process. So that it's a raven where I'm going to show you the same image at various steps, but it started out looking like a drawing with that Wonder marker on a white shirt. But I drew that image, and then I waxed I waxed all of the white areas inside here, and then, or I use non-wax resist, and then I painted. And you can see, to get that level of detail with the little bit of white in here, you can't do that with wax. It's just, the wax doesn't give you that fine of map of structure. So I had to use the non-wax to get these lines, or to get that little tiny areas of whiteness to stay on. Does that make sense? And that meant, so I waxed around the outside, just like I showed you with that big tapestry. I waxed some of the big areas where there's the white, but in the little areas, I'd use the non-wax resist on both sides. Then I come in there and I paint, and so this, at this level, it's ready for another layer of waxing. At this point now, what I'm going to do is show you that I've waxed all the areas oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention, these embroidery hoops, and they're on the list of things too. Get a bunch of sizes of these, because these really help, because it's got to be stretched out to be able to do the wax. It's got to be, you got to have the material stretched out. This one, basically, and it's hard to appreciate, but I've gone ahead and I've waxed all of the red that I painted in. So the first waxing left the red exposed. Now all this red is waxed in. And so now this one is still got, I want to still add a little bit of red to a few places where you can't appreciate it, but there's still little areas in here where I want to add very small amounts of red to get to the final step, where you can see they're now all red. This thing is ready to be thrown in and dip dyed. And what I've done is I've tried to stay in touch with the first wax that I put on here. I haven't washed this out only once, so it still has enough integrity, if you will, to withstand having a dip dye to get to the place where I showed you in that first shirt, to make sure that it only shows a little bit of the dye coming through in the white areas and not completely overdoing it. The wax paint, wax paint, wax paint, but to be very careful about how degraded that first wax gets, because it's so sad to lose the whole image at the last step.
This is tie-dyed though.
The same with the dip dye. Now, one thing I wanted to show with this one on the dip dye is you see all the cracking that I've gotten in here. I love Batik cracks. I put each one of those in by hand. And the way I did that, by
crumpling up the shirt?
No, you can do it that way, but that is not a controlled process. It's by crumpling up the shirt, it's just gonna go random. I actually went all around as I was putting in the wax and doing just small little areas and letting it harden while I went to the other one. And then I come back, and where the previous wax gets hard, and then you put new molten wax in there, you create a place where it's not continuous, and that introduces a crack. So these cracks, I knew where it was going to be. And is it clear how I generated that? I literally did this area right here, and then I did another one over here, another one over here, another one over here, and then came back to this area after it was hard and put a molten part next to it. And at the junction, there's a crack.
I just didn't understand your answer to Charman's question about the tie-dye. So is that a separate process when you're done with batiking, when you tie-dye things? Oh, okay.
So basically, once things are so where I'm at, ready for this, I actually am going to do an avocado green over dye on this. And what I do is, and the process for that is I dissolve, there's a Procyon color called avocado, which I really enjoy. And I'll put in about 3/4 of a gallon of water into a bucket and put in about a tablespoon and a half. And I'd like to tell you always the same amount, but it's another variable. It depends how dark you want it to be, even within one color. But I put about a tablespoon or tablespoon and a half per 3/4 of a gallon or so with this much material, whisk it up just in water. That's inactive, so it doesn't have the soda ash in it yet. Then I'll put the whole shirt in there, and believe me, you really hope that your wax is good. and saturate the shirt with that inactive dye. And then I add an equal volume of the soda ash to that same bucket, and that activates it. But all the dye is already in contact with it, so it really gives it a nice over dye to get something like, you know, like this, where it looks pretty evenly dyed everywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As opposed to, you could also make up just 1.5 gallons of active dye, but I found that when it's all activated and you put the white shirt in there, you get, you know, it's not as it doesn't come out as nicely evenly dyed when you do it that way. So I actually pre-soak the shirt
if you want that dye. So if you want that like hand dyed look, then you would do it the other way. Like if you want it to look sort of, you know, blotchy or whatever.
Yeah, I don't ever want to do that. So.
I love that look. I love it.
Well, then you should do that. There's always 100 ways to do something.
So I have a question about your dip dyes. When you, how big is your container when you dip them? And do you just like sit it in there and let it sit, or do you have to move it around? Or
good question.
Do you need heat for it, or is
no, you
it
don't
not?
need heat. It's a cold water process. It's really, I like to have the material able to go all the way underneath the surface of the dye. And I do kind of, I haven't exhaustively tested what the effect is, but I can't help myself from going in there and stirring it around every like 15 minutes or a half hour, especially at the beginning. It needs to go for about a couple of hours, and then it's pretty much done.
And then when you rinse it out, do you have any problems with it bleeding in the laundry or anything like that?
The things to be aware of there is, so I wash them out in larger buckets, and I use cold water for that too, at the beginning at least, because I don't want a lot of wax going down the drain and stuff like that. I use that liquid detergent that's on the list, and I use that to basically vigorously wash it out to the point where I don't see lots of dye coming out. And then I rinse it. And then how do you get that wax out? And some people iron it out, and through newspapers or cloths or whatever, and I can't do that because there's too much the fumes. I can't handle that. So what I do is I have a big bucket, a big trough bucket, and it's like 3 or 4 feet by a foot in the backyard. And above it, I have, I put the shirt in a hanger, and I spread the front and the back apart from each other with clothespins so that it's not in contact. And then I actually pour boiling water over the wax, and that melts the wax and it collects in the bucket. And that way, so I'm not ironing it. I don't get any fumes that way. And I usually only have to do that from one side. But make sure you spread the front and back apart, because it'll just, if it cools, it'll just drip, on the other side as you're pouring it over, because it's not as hot. Then it takes longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the dyes that you're using, the Dharma dyes are, I don't know if that company is all non-toxic, or, I mean, what's the impact?
So,
like if you want to, rather than put it down the drain, say put it into your garden or something like that.
Well, you've got the detergent in there. So the bulk of the dye, when you're washing it out, goes out in the detergent wash. It's a fabric dye. So I guess I look at it that I see the 7.5 billion people on the planet or whatever, and they're not wearing all white, and it's the same fabric dye. So I figure we're all going to have to answer for our sins someday.
Dharma trading. Yeah, I was like, Dharma trading dyes tend to be low impact.
I know that they have a great reputation. I'm also curious, like if any of this stuff would work, and we need Elena here, to talk about like the natural dye approach too, because it would be interesting to, see if there was any way to combine the techniques,
All of the waxing part of it should be amenable to that. I just don't have experience with it.
So what are some projects that you're looking forward to doing, or experiments that you haven't done yet, or how experimental do you get with your process? Do you feel like it's kind of locked in at this point, or where's your frontier?
My frontier is really enabling happiness in other people more than refining my process at this point. I'm very, I love the look on people's faces when they see the nature of batik is something that it's very historical and it's ancient, and when it's applied to their band or you know, their family or whatever, I like thinking about what I'm doing, and that's where I get really my joy. The technical aspects of it, I feel very confident and comfortable with. I'm not saying that I still don't lose projects every once in a while because I let the wax degrade too much or something. It's really frustrating.
So in terms of letting the wax degrade, is it a number of times that you use it? I mean, do you feel like 2 or 3 times is enough, or when do you get into the danger zone?
Well, and I just want to make sure that when I talk about the wax degrading, it's in that process of generating layer upon layer, where the first wax you put on, once it's washed out, it's not the same. And then when you put the second layer on, that first wax is not the same as what it was when you first put it on. And so I've spent large times where I've, at the end, where when I did the over dye, I just lost a lot of what I did because the wax wasn't strong enough to keep the over dye from getting through. That is the most challenging.
So it's from the fabric moving around,
just scrunching it up, and just the physical washing of it in between. So some of the answers to that are, yeah, you can strip all the wax off before you do the over dye and reapply it all, but that's using twice as much. You know, that's a lot of work. Well, I talk about washing out the fabric in between the wax applications, but I've refined my technique so that I try to get the most done with the primary waxing and then wash it out. And then on the second, because it lasts once pretty well. On the secondary and tertiary paintings, sometimes I won't wash it out in between. I'll just wax over the unwashed dyeing that I've done. So if I have a little bit that I've added on to a project, I won't wash it out. I'll just wax over that. Now the wax isn't when the dye is still in it, the wax doesn't penetrate quite as well, but it does a pretty good job. And so that's one of the things I've used to solve that problem.
If you was to do a repeat pattern, what would be the best way to do that with the dye? Or
so a stamp.
Okay.
That's what a lot of traditional batikers, you know, when you have a material that's got a repeat pattern in it, there's you can make a stamp, which then you can just repeatedly go through. I've never done it myself, but that's what people.
So is that like would you need a different wax, or would a lino like the?
I don't think again, it's not something I've ever done.
Okay.
But I could just look at it and surmise that they have a, you know, maybe the wax would be belted maybe in a bigger container, and then you just stick the stamp in and then carefully stamp it across your material. The thing that I would just hypothesize about that is to just make sure that you get the wax is hot enough so that when you can see the same image on both sides. Because if one of the signs of batiking where the wax isn't going to really be effective is if you don't see it on the other side.
With the stamping, is that something you could custom make yourself?
I would think so.
Okay.
Again, they do sell stamps, I know, and I think that, you know, and again, I mean, I bet there's people, or just searching the internet, you probably get a lot more information on it. But it seems to me that would be something one could do.
I'm interested in, I've been interested in African prints.
Yeah.
And I've been wanting to try my hand in making my own set of African prints.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so how do I obtain like these type of prints? Like, I you know, cause like people make it seem so easy, you know, and I'm like, I don't know if it's something that I have to do by hand, like manually do by hand, which could take forever to do. There has to be a way to kind of like reduce the time. So I'm like, what is the best way to do that?
Well, you know what I would do first is I would actually separate the variables, as we like to say in science, and perhaps buy a stamp and just get all of the technique with a stamp that's commercially available. And then that might help you refine your approach to making your own stamp. And I think that's what I would do.
Okay.
And I think Dharma sells some stamps. I've never done it, but I know you can buy these stamps, and I would just kind of use someone else's stamp, and then I think you'll learn a lot of the things you need to bring to play in making your own stamp.
Okay.
And I encourage you to stay on that line, because really that's where the passion will come in. So
yes,
yeah,
thank you.
I'm excited.
Thank you very much.
I'm really glad that you brought that up about stamps, because I'm watching your designs and everything, and they're just so intimidating. I mean, you're an artist, and it looks really detailed and complicated, but I think I could do stamps.
Yeah.
I think I could start with that. That's a good idea.
That's why I really encourage, one doesn't have to run at the beginning. Learn to walk first, and then you'll generate your interests will change. I guarantee. So I would definitely look into some of these stamps and then figure out where to go from there.
I think for me as an artist, like I don't know if this is thinking too much into it, but like I'm focused on authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it's like, okay, if I was to create an image, I would want to redo the image where it's from my own hands and not from something that someone else has created and then I just stamp. You know what I mean? Because then it doesn't really feel authentic. And so, like I kind of been like trying my hand. Like I've been doing a lot of design printing. I've been doing it on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I went to school to design school, so I really found that I really like designing things on the computer and then applying them on textiles, like on digital textiles. But I would really like to see it come to fruition, like on actual like fabrics and garments and things of that nature. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about the different layers, does each color have to be a separate layer, or can you work with multiple colors inside one layer?
Well, so that's why I have my ice cube tray out there. Yes, yeah, you can. They just have to, they can actually also be gradients. So for example, I like to sunsets. I'll make I'll start with turquoise and have, and perhaps having something like royal blue on the other side, and then have a gradient all the way across in my ice cube tray, and then just go over and over and over and just make a whole gradient to give the appearance of a sunset or sunrise, if you will. So it's everything's possible.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I just want to wrap up today so that you can get to your rehearsal in time, because I know we were kind of squeezing this in between things. And say thank you so much, because this has been a great wealth of information. And I think anybody that is interested in batiking has like a running start now. It was awesome having you. And for anybody that's watching this in playback, if you are interested in Fashion Revolution, a support group for indie designers, then drop a comment below. We'd love to have volunteers volunteer with any of our designers. That would be awesome. We're also looking for collaborators all the time, models, photographers, retailers, anybody that sees a way that they could connect with us as we build our businesses. We'd love to hear from you.
Qualities in our test, and our lifetime.